It's the same for you as it is for many others. There are only a couple elements that you need to remember when it comes time to not only surviving in a recession, but also thriving. Now that really comes back down to a couple different elements. First element is to know where you're at. So take stock of your income, your expenses, your savings, and your investments. And then the second element that you can do, a stress test, making sure that you know where you're at today in light of where we're going. Recessions are no fun, and it's something that actually happens on average about 7 to 10 years. Now, when we talk about recessions, it comes after an expansionary period of time in our economy. So yes, we have a growth period. We have a period that we are doing well. And then what happens is that the cyclical nature of our economy takes over. So we have an expansion period and then we have a contraction period. And the contraction periods don't need to be very severe. They can be something that is just something we just need to get through, a very short time of contraction before we look to the next expansion phase. Other times we have more significant contractions and more significant and severe, prolonged times that we are in this recessionary environment. Those are the times that we really need to be focused on how to survive through them so that we can get to the other side, so we can start thriving again when that expansionary period of time comes. So when we take a look at how to survive and thrive through a recession, we need to know, well, where we're at today. That's the first element that we need to know, where we are at on the expansion or the recession cycle. Well, let me pull up this chart here. Okay, what we're seeing here is that, yes, we do have an environment where we have some growth happening with our economy. This is the expansion period of time. This is where we really are doing well. We are really growing. And a lot of times this is coming out of a recession. Well, then we start to mature. So you can start to see that, yes, we are still growing, but we're not quite going through a recession yet. This is the time that we're starting to see things of growth starting to slow, but we're not to the point of starting to say that they are going negative or things are starting to go wrong with the economy. But then when we really start to get to a point down here on the trough, that's where we start to see that things are really starting to change. Things are starting to go wrong with the economy, and now we're starting to see the effects of a recession. Okay, well, if that's just a sine curve, and this is, again, the cyclical nature of our economy, well, now we can start to figure out what's working in each different environment. So how do we know what environment we're in? Are we in an expansionary period of time? We're really actually being able to grow the accounts, grow the economy, and do very well? Are we on kind of a plateauing or a maturing of the economy, and now we are really starting to maybe not grow as much, but starting to see kind of the fruits of the labor? Or are we on an environment where we're on this downward slope, where we are really starting to see the effects of a contraction of our economy? That comes back down to the data. So what we do then, and what you can be doing, is taking a look at the data, the different information that we have here. And this is just 30 different elements that we track. But what we can really start telling is the story of where the economy is going. So this is just taking a look at 2020, 2021, and halfway through 2022. But what we can start seeing is that we actually did have a lot of bad elements coming out of 2020. Well, that is obviously pretty indicative of the fact that we had COVID. We had this forced shutdown of our economy, a forced shutdown of just us being able to go to work. We had to stay in our homes. We had a lot going wrong for us. So yes, it makes sense that the data would be negative. But here's the thing. When we take a look at the overall, the big picture cycle, we really didn't have a significant downturn in our economy since 2008, 2009. Yes, we had some problems in 2014, 2015. We had some problems again in 2018, but this was not that severe. This is something that was saying we actually had a prolonged period of growth happening in our economy. So we saw the growth coming out of the 2008-2009 recession. We saw the maturing or the plateauing right around about 2019, early 2020 with respect to where we were at with our economy. And that actually led into COVID. Well, we saw a lot of stimulus that happened, and that stimulus really took effect 2021 into the very first part of 2022. So we saw a lot of growth. But now what we're starting to see is that turnover effect starting to happen. And you can start seeing a lot of red starting to crop up. So here we are right here, and we're going to start putting in a lot more data. And that data is, with all mathematical certainty, most likely going to be red. Red is bad, obviously, in what we're trying to do here. So what that means then is that we can start to pick where we're at on that economic cycle. Well, then when we start to take a look at what we call the lead index, that's the Lion's Wealth activity and development stages, we can really start to figure out where we're at in the process and where we are going in the future. And that alone is going to really help us to make sure that we know what investments are going to be working. You see, in leads 1, lead 2, almost anything works. Whatever we're going to be invested in most likely is going to go up and increase in value just because of the nature of where we're at in our economy. But it isn't until we get to leads 3 and 4. So leads 3 is where we actually start to see a slowing of economic growth, but we still have a lot of inflation. But lead 4 is the worst of the worst. This is where I call it economies go to die. And this is where we actually start seeing the fact that we have a slowing of growth, but we also start to see a moderation or a slowing of the increase of inflation. Now that's where we're at right now. We're not to a deflationary environment. We're still growing in inflation, just not as much. Well, that still puts us into that lead 4 environment, and that is recessionary in nature. So when we go back to our chart here of what works in a recession, now we start to say, all right, well, if we are kind of on the elements here, the come downs, kind of in the elements here that, let's go black and let's make this black here. Or even we can do red as well, but when we know we're in the trough period, we know we're in these recessions, now we can start looking at the different elements that work for the investments. But before we get to that, before we get back to what's working in the environments, we actually need to go through a second element. That second element is the stress test. Now, the stress test is vitally important actually for knowing kind of where we're at and what investments are going to be working in this environment. So when we take a look at the stress test, when we take a look at all of the different things that can be working or going wrong in this environment, we need to take account of where we're at. So now that we know that we're coming into a recession because of how the data is starting to show it, now we can start saying, all right, where are we at with our income? Where are we at with our different investments that we're doing, with the savings that we have, with our different expenses? And we can start to put together the particulars that are going to make up the stress test. So let me do this. Let me share my screen here, and I'm actually going to walk you through a stress test that you can do on your own. All right, here we are. This is the stress test. Now, we always start by saying where you're at today. So again, this is something that you can do as well. There are other softwares that are out there. You can get some free tools online, but the software that I'm going to take you through is ones that we work with here. And this is something that goes into depth with respect to where you're at today and where you want to go in the future. So what you're seeing here is that right away, we're going to take a look at where you're at today. And this is giving you a 93% probability of success that the money you have is going to last all of retirement. Well, that is a fantastic number to say. If we know that we have a 93% probability, well, now we can do some planning. We can take a look at where you're at and where you want to be giving money to. Maybe you want to be leaving a legacy, or maybe you want to be spending a little more money, maybe doing some more travel. A lot of different aspects. Well, that all comes back down to knowing where we're at. Now, this probability is based upon 1,000 different outcomes of the stock market. So we take a look at one element, one outcome, and that's that the market can do no wrong. It goes straight up from here for the next 30, 40 years of retirement. Well, most likely your investments are going to work well, you're going to have enough money, and you're going to have money that lasts all of retirement. So that's one element, but that's only one element. There's a second element that looks at then as well. The exact opposite. So let's say that between now and all of retirement, the accounts go down in value. Well, there's going to be a likelihood that you're going to run out of money just because of the nature of what's going on with the economy and the stock market. But now we can take a look at 998 different scenarios in between those two. And what we come out with in this scenario right here, that this plan that we have in place here, is that 930 times out of 1,000, not only did you have money to have for all of retirement, but you also have a little money to leave as a legacy. So this is a good starting point. This is saying, where are we at today? But then what we can start to do is go through and put together some planning. So we're going to increase, in this case, just inflation. We're going to make no other changes. We're going to make just the changes to inflation and to our assumptions. So now we can start to build that in. Well, we do have the calculations that it goes through, and what you can see here is that instead of 93% probability of success, all of a sudden we only have a 57% probability of success. So only 570 times out of 1,000 did you actually make it through retirement with your assets. That's not very good. Right away, that says that there's changes that are needed. Now, these are the types of things that you can go through in your stress test as well, because if you are taking a look at where you're at today and the changes that happen with the economy, whether that is due to inflation, whether that is due to a drawdown in your investments, now we know how to make some slight adjustments. And making slight adjustments can actually have some profound impacts on your financial future. Let me give you an example here. Say if we have a couple percent that we lose in the stock market, it's not that hard to make that up. But if we start losing a lot more, 20%, 30%, 40% in the stock market, it takes a lot more to get back to where we were. And it actually takes a lot more to grow the accounts if we're taking money out as well as part of living expenses. So we want to make sure that we can start making those small little changes when necessary so that they don't turn into those larger, basically, problems that we have to start really compensating for. So let's take a look at this scenario here. All we did was increase inflation to make it a little bit more realistic for today's environment. And you can see, going from on the left where the probability did work, we were only at about 3% inflation. Well, now we've significantly increased that going forward, and you can see how profound of a difference that made on the probability of success. Well, let's make some small little adjustments. So we are only going to be decreasing your living expenses by 3%. That's it. Only 3%. Well, if we do that, and coupled by the fact that we make some small little adjustments with your portfolio, look at this. We went from 57 back up to 80%. Now, 80% is actually pretty fantastic. So that should make you happy. But that 3% that we took from your expenses, that only amounted to about a couple $100s a month. So we made an adjustment to your expenses by reducing how much you spend by just a couple $100s a month. We made a couple of small little adjustments to the to the investments themselves so that we could grow just by a couple percent, getting back from where we were. So you see, we don't have to go and get 10%, 15% growth to make this work. We just had to have some slight adjustments. So when we do the stress test, we can figure out, yes, in an environment where we have some hyperinflation starting to happen, making some small little adjustments can actually be very beneficial down the road. That's our number 2 element, the stress test. And that leads us to our number 3 element, how to thrive. Well, that can be done many different ways. But here's one element I want you to remember. Desperate people do desperate things in times like this. When we are in a recession, people don't always feel very wealthy. And in fact, many of them may have lost their job. So they start to turn to doing desperate things because of the fact they're becoming desperate themselves. Well, what happens then is that they may unjustly sue you. They may do things that may actually try to harm you. Just because if they can get a little bit of money in return, that's going to help them out. So how do we thrive? Well, it starts with the fact that we take a look at where we're at today. We put together a stress test. We make some small little adjustments to the investment side of things. But now we can take a look at the fact that if we're going to be in this environment for a while, we know there's going to be some pain that's out there. Let's start making a couple small little adjustments to some of the other key elements of your financial plan. Now, those elements usually come back in the forms of the insurances. So yes, healthcare insurance, making sure you have enough healthcare insurance, while making sure that you have the right buy and sell agreements with your business, making sure that in this case, what we were just talking about, you have enough property casualty insurance. You see, when you have some ice on your front sidewalk, someone can come up and legitimately try to hurt themselves, to sue you, and yes, most likely they will be compensated in one way, shape, or form for that. But having those property casualty insurances in place will actually protect you against having it come back to using your hard-earned money that you have put aside, your wealth, in order to cover those lawsuits. And it may be that your homeowner's insurance is not enough. You may want to have an umbrella policy or other elements to cover your assets, cover your home, cover your autos, and the things that you own. You see, when you have a break-in, that's not the time to try to take stock of what you have. But to do that, take stock of what you have, to insure it properly in times like this will actually be more impactful than making sure that you can not only sustain your wealth, but then thrive on the other side. So it's not always coming back to the investment side of things. It's not always coming back to the stress testing itself. It's coming back to those elements, the other elements that you have that will make sure that you are taken care of, that you are protected. And that alone is going to be the key driver to making sure that you can survive through this environment, this bad time with the economy, and come out on the other side in order to thrive.